counted but thoroughness and honesty. When you're finished, you're going to consider it carefully. And you're going to consider it carefully in the fourth column.
And what is it? You got to know what it is. It's your first three columns. You're going to consider these first three columns carefully. What Joe's starting to go into is going to be a shift in state of consciousness so you can see some truth when you write your fourth column. So this next page and a half of instructions.
Look how I've shifted already. Layer number 1 of the onion. Who are you mad at? People, institutions, and principles. Layer number 2. Why are you angry? Layer number 3. It's turning deeper and deeper into myself. Layer number 3. How did it hurt, threaten, or interfere with your self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook? Now, layer number 4. We went back through our lives, nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. Page number 66. The first thing apparent is that the world and its people were often quite wrong. And to conclude that others were wrong was as far as I usually ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong me, and I stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more I fought and tried to have my own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win, and my moments of triumph were short-lived.
And, again, relating back to the columns, if you look at the area you just read, he said, it's apparent to me this world and its people are often quite wrong. And I look at that and I think to myself, well, they just said column 1 and 2. The world, all those people, institutions, and people, quite wrong. What I wrote about them in column 2, why I'm mad. To conclude others, column 1, were wrong. Column 2 was as far as I ever got. The usual outcome is that people, column 1, continue to wrong me, column 2, and I stayed sore, column 3. Sometimes it's remorse, and then I'm sore at myself. But the more I fight and try to have my own way, the worse matters got. So as in war, I only seem to win. My moments of triumph were short-lived. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to, highlight this, futility and unhappiness.
Do I believe that?
And even more, what is the book trying to say to me? To the precise extent that I permit these, and highlight permit. Here's why you got to consider this. If resentments kill more alcoholics than anything else, and I've been shown a tool to get rid of resentments, why would I permit myself to have resentments? So that to precise extent that I permit these, do I squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic, with me, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave.
Continue to turn statements into questions.
We found resentments are fatal. For when harboring such feelings, these resentments, I shut myself off from the sunlight of the Spirit, God. The insanity alcohol returns and I drink again, and with me to drink is to die. So if I was going to live, I had to be free of anger. Now it doesn't say I won't be angry, it just says I got to be free of it. The grouch and the brainstorm are not for me. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for me these things are poison, being a grouch and a brainstorm. So now I need to turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. Now that's a powerful sentence. The list holds the key to my future.
Something in these first 3 columns, if I can look at it from an entirely different angle, holds the key to the prison that I'm in, thinking that they did it to me. A key to my future. So we're going to see 2 exercises now to turn back to the first 3 columns. One is a prayerful exercise, and then the other one's going to be written. So first now this prayerful exercise that will turn you to looking at the first 3 columns from an entirely different angle to find the key to your future.
So we're prepared to look at it, this list, from an entirely different angle. Here's the angle. We began to see the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, us thinking they dominated us, the wrongdoing of others,
column 2,
fancied or real, had the power to actually kill.
All 7 areas of my life in column 3.
How could I escape? I saw these resentments must be mastered, but how? I could not wish them away any more than alcohol.
We're powerless over our own resentments.
So this was my course. I realized the people who wronged me were perhaps spiritually sick. Though I did not like their symptoms,
column 2,
and the way they disturbed me,
column 3,
they, like me, were sick too. Now here's the prayer. I ask God to help me show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend.
We're going to find a prayer for the resentment inventory. We're going to find a prayer for the fear inventory. And we're going to find a prayer for the sex inventory. This is the prayer for the resentment inventory. And keep in mind, I don't like it when I hear in meetings people sharing, oh, that person I needed to realize was perhaps spiritually sick, and I'm up here and they're down here. What this paragraph reminds me of is they, like myself, are perhaps spiritually sick. I always love when I'm on the highway and I cuss somebody out for doing something to me. Invariably, within 5 minutes, I am doing the same thing to somebody else. Right?
He used that word, doing something to me, didn't he? Did you hear him? See, here's the place, experientially, I'll tell you the place where I'm at with this. Again, I've been so spiritually ignorant so much of my life. When I get to the fourth column, I'm going to start on common ground. Here's the common ground. They're spiritually sick, and so am I. Because here's something I never knew. Any human being on the planet who's ever harmed me, and any harm that I've ever generated in my life, I did that because I was spiritually ignorant. Because I did not know that you and I are one, and when I harm you, I harm me. I never knew that. And it's taken me to a common ground to mark you're spiritually sick, and they are spiritually sick. So there isn't any of this I'm superior stuff, and they're less than. We're both in this state here. We're both spiritually sick. So it goes on to say, and here's the prayer. When a person offended, I said to myself, this is a sick man or woman, if the case applies. How can I be helpful to him or her? God, save me from being angry, thy will be done. I avoid retaliation or argument. Boy, that's a hard one to practice. Whew. And here's why. I wouldn't treat sick people that way. See, it's so hard for my ego to grasp that when somebody's coming at me and they're angry or someone harms me, it's so hard for me to grasp they do that because they're spiritually sick like me. You see? I wouldn't treat sick people that way. If I do, I destroy my chance of being helpful. I cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God... Now look at this. God will show me how to take a kind and tolerant view of each and every one. God will show me how to do that. So now referring to my list again, putting out of my mind the wrongs others had done, the first three columns, I'm going to resolutely look for my own mistakes.
Here's the fourth column. Where was I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely my fault, I tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where was I to blame? The inventory is mine, not the other man's. When I see my faults, I list them. I place them before me in black and white. The fourth column is to be written out, not a check mark. It's my contention that this is true. Everything you need for 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 comes from the detailed fourth column.
Yep.
To admit the exact nature of my wrong, the things that need to be removed in 6 and 7, my clarity on harm in 8, and what I need to say to you in my amends as far as my part in 9. Let me say it again. Everything you're going to need for 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, the next 5 steps, comes from your clarity that God reveals to you in the written fourth column.
And you don't just write down the words, I'm selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and afraid. Here's what you write. The book says false. Write down the action you either took or did not take to create harm. I'll go back to my example with Jeff. Here's why. If I look at the action I took or I didn't take, it will show me my selfishness, self-seeking, dishonesty, and fear. One thing it's easy for any one of us in this room to see is our fault. In other words, what was the action I either took or didn't take behind this resentment? So here's some of my fourth column around Jeff. I gossip about Jeff.
Judged
him.
Shunned.
I shunned him. I avoided Jeff. That was an action that... I avoided Jeff. That's an action I didn't take, right? Now, I gossiped about him as an action I did take. And behind these actions that I'm looking at in this fourth column, I see that there's fear. And I see there's selfishness. And I see there's dishonesty. and I see there's selfish self-seeking. But like Joe said, 5 through 9, you've got to look at the actions you either took or did not take.
Where you were dishonest and your fears. So, let's look at selfishness and self-seeking. I don't tend to lump them together, but I also don't tend to make people jerk around in their mind as to what belongs under selfish and what belongs under self-seeking. If you want a definition that works, if you're the one with the cocaine and I do anything I can to get some, I'm being self-seeking. It's what I'm after. If I'm the one with the cocaine and ain't nobody going to get none, I'm being really selfish. That's the things I want to hold on to. So self-seeking is what I'm after, selfish is what I want to hold on to. But there's 3 ways of looking at selfish and self-seeking. What did I do before the resentment, during, or after that brought it on? I find sometimes with resentments there's a lot I did before the guy punched me out that brought him on punching me out. He didn't just walk up in a vacuum to a stranger and punch me out in front of my friends. This never really happened, but I just made this one up. I slept with his old lady. I stole $500 from him. Everything I put in the second column that he did to me, I did to him before he did whatever it was he did to me to bring the whole thing on. Then during it, I punched him out, yelled at him, screamed at him, stuff during the resentment. Then there's stuff I do to retaliate afterwards. Shunned him, slandered him, judged him, got back at him, retaliated, did this, this, and this. Things I do to hold on to what I have. Things I do to protect myself and how I look. I lie, I gossip, I yell, I withdraw, I shun. Then under dishonesty. So you can see down here at the bottom with Charlie, I put explanations next to selfish and self-seeking. And I put explanations next to dishonesty. And under afraid, I'm going to just correlate my fears so they're all in one place for me to make my fear inventory. Dishonesty, we're going to look at 3 types of dishonesty. Outright lies, we all know what that is. Lies of omission, that's when you don't say anything. And lies of self-delusion. That's the biggest lie you've told yourself. Let's take my favorite example where I get free and the first 3 columns turn into a lie. When I put in the first column, and we did forget a very important thing here. At the top of every page of inventory, for every second column, write a prayer at the top of the page. Dear God, please help me see the things in myself which are blocking me from you. Something like that. And then in the first column, I numbered it, and I put her name, Susie. The second column, I lettered it A, and I put she left me. Then I saw that when Susie left me, it hurt, threatened, or interfered with my self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook. Then I write my fourth column, and I see where I was selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and afraid. I did this, I slept with her best friend, I judged her, I shunned her, I yelled at her, I shut her out of my life, I did this, and this that was selfish and self-seeking. I also told her a lie about this, I lied about this, I didn't tell her about this, and I lied to myself that I needed her to be okay, which was the biggest lie that I told myself. And there was a lot of dishonesty going on. I was afraid of rejection, I was afraid of pain, I was afraid of looking bad, and all of a sudden, you know what the fourth column does? It turns the first 3 columns into lies, because you know what? I wasn't mad at her. I was mad at myself. And you know what? She didn't leave me. I drove her away. And what I thought was the truth, if you would have asked me those few days after she left me, when I'm in that state of consciousness, you would have said, Joe, who and why are you mad? I would have told you the first 2 columns were the truth. What do you mean, who and why am I mad? I'm mad at her for leaving me. By the time I'm done with the fourth column, my consciousness has shifted to where she didn't leave me. I drove her away, and what I was ready to fight for the truth that she left me turns into a lie. And the lie that I had anything to do with it turns into the truth, and the truth sets me free. My troubles with her leaving me were of my own making, because I drove her away. I might as well write a new first and second column. When the fourth column reveals to me that which is true, I should go back and I should put in another color ink. The first column that I was really mad at was me, and the second column was because I drove her away by doing this stuff in the fourth column. The fourth column turns the first three columns into lies. You do not seek truth in the first three columns. You only see the lies, but you start by putting down that they're the truth. A clear fourth column turns the first three columns into lies.
And makes it much easier to make the amend. You see why?
My troubles with her leaving me were of my own making, and all I had to do was go and talk to her about the stuff I saw in the fourth column, and she didn't have to come back, see the light, admit she was wrong, or beg forgiveness for me to get free. But when I'm in those first three columns, I have an ego that tells me, if she doesn't come back, you no longer exist. If she doesn't admit she's wrong, if she doesn't see the truth, you'll never get free.
And I
never get free.
I've written enough inventory to know there was a book out, it's called People the Lie, and I've written enough inventory and done enough work drunks to know we are people of the lie.
We have a friend that calls this whole four-column process the theater of the lie, where you get to see a one-act play in its entirety, and you get to face your part. If you do some extended work that's in the stuff we're going to give you with the third column, you're also going to begin to see where the committee was at work in this resentment, and you had these different personalities telling you different things about when she left you. But that's a whole other story.
Here's the other thing that'll change as you get experience with steps 4 through 9. Number 1, when she leaves you, Joe and I, if that happens to us, we can't go to our home group. We have to go to other meetings and whine about her leaving. Because when we walk into our groups and we start to whine about her leaving, they say shit to us like,
"Is it possible?"
Yeah.
In my home group, if you share and somebody raises their hand and they start a question, remember I told you we get to ask questions all 4 Tuesdays of the month, and they start a question with, "Is it possible?" you might as well just crawl under your chair because they're going to hammer you.
See, I'll give you an example. Susie's been calling me down in Texas for almost 2 years. And every time, almost the majority of times when she calls me, she wants to talk to me about the first 3 columns, and I take her in rapid speed right over to the fourth, and she just hates it. She wants to call me and tell me what he did, and this is going on, and this is going on, and this is going on, and I zoom her right into the fourth column. Did you make decisions based on self which placed you in a position to be hurt? What is your part of this? What is your part of this? And now she understands. Now she knows.
She calls last night, 12 o'clock in the morning, right? This guy doesn't want to do this, he doesn't want to do that. Talk to Mark. Click. Right? I'm not going to hear that shit.
But see, thank God. Thank God I have enough work with this to know that my troubles are my own making. But see, if you don't have experience with this or you're not around people, we come into meetings and we want to talk about the first 3 columns all the time. She left, or he's a bastard, or blah, 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 blah. There's no freedom in any of that.
Let's hear a piece we wrote here for Mr. Brown might get my job at the office. Here's how a piece would sound when you're going to read it. And you're going to read across rather than the way you wrote it down. Because we did all the first column, then we did all the second column, then we did all the third column, then we did all the fourth column. But here's how it sounds when you read one piece. Column 1, number 1, Mr. Brown. A, might get my job at the office. That's the second column. Third column, affects my self-esteem, my pride, my ambition, my security, my personal relations, my sex relations, and my pocketbook. Selfish and self-seeking. I would drink at work and cause problems for others. I blamed Brown for my problems when he was trying to help. Dishonest, lied about my drinking, told untruths to hide my mistakes, and my self-delusion was that I wasn't hurting anyone but myself. Afraid, being unimportant, not good enough, not needed, unrespected, unliked, untrusted, irresponsible, financially insecure, and judged. We just listed the fears. I'll tell you a couple from my last inventory. I can't tell you any from this because I haven't written inventory yet. But I had one where I have a meditation teacher who studied with Thomas Merton for 10 years at the monastery at Gethsemane, and he's been my teacher for a couple years. Not my sponsor. I have a sponsor. He's just been a meditation teacher. And I sent a book to a friend in Buffalo, a girl named Sandy. And she called me about 6 weeks later. She said, I read James Finley's book, and it's a bunch of self-centered bullshit. And I argued with her for about 40 minutes on the phone. And we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And we hang up, and she gets to be free, and I have to live with that. And I have to live with that until I decide to get free of it. And I decide to get free of it, and I put her name in the first column. And then in the second column, I put judged my teacher and said his book was self-centered bullshit. Affects my self-esteem, my pride, my ambition, my security, my personal relations, my sex relations. I found how all 7 were affected. Then in the fourth column, I'm writing along, blah, blah, blah. I judged her, la-da-da, la-da-da, yelled at her, screamed at her. And then the truth came out. I never read his book. I'm on the phone for 20 or 30 minutes defending a book that I've never read. Another one. Didn't make my inventory. It didn't make my inventory because I didn't resent my home group this time or that time. And in the fifth step, the guy said, "Do you leave anything out?" I said, "Well, there is one thing in my mind that I didn't write about. I don't tell the truth to my home group about the ruin." He said, "What?" I said, "I don't tell my home group the truth about their..." He said, "Excuse me, I didn't quite hear you. What'd you say?" I said, "I don't tell my home group the truth about their rent." He said, "What?" I said, "Well, my home group's rent is $150 a month, but the church raised it to $200. They can't really afford it. So as a really nice guy who cares about that group, I anonymously donate $50 a month to the church to cover our rent."
Looks good, doesn't it?
Looks great. And this is what the ego can do 13 years sober now that it's refined itself and I don't steal from the church anymore. I now put, and it sounds good, he says, "You do what?" I said, "Well, I don't tell them that their rent's $200. I put $50 in a month so they can cover their rent because they always have trouble covering their rent." He said, "My God, kid, tell the group the truth about their affairs and you'll watch them straighten out. Tell them the truth and put what you want in the kitty. Why do you do that?" And I started off with, "Well, because I really care about the group and I'm a great guy." He said, "Why do you do that?" "Well, because I don't really want them to tell them I don't want to." "Why do you do that?" "Well, I don't want them to move because they meet across the street from where I live." And it comes out.
You know, it's
3 weeks later, I have to sit with my group in group conscience and say, "I've lied to you about your rent. I've been putting $50 in, and I haven't been honest with you about your monetary affairs." And they've never had a problem with rent since.
You know, it's like about the truth of the second column becoming a lie. I mean, how many people in here have ever done this when you have this fear of abandonment? Raise your hands. Everybody, right? See, here's this thing about what a lie that. I want to tell you what a lie that is. I've written enough inventory and looked at it enough times at my fourth column. Here's what it is. There's a part of me that guarantees it will take a series of actions that a mule would abandon me, let alone a human being. I don't have a fear of abandonment at all. You see, this four-column resentment inventory has gotten me free of so many lies that I've been telling to myself and so many lies I've been living. It's like some of the stuff we've been talking about.
Fear of abandonment? I got a fear that she's going to stay. What are you talking about? Huh?
But it sounds better to me to tell you I suffer from low self-esteem and fears of abandonment, see?
In the middle of inventory, you don't have low self-esteem. You got just a little too much self-esteem for yourself, right?
And I don't need to like myself more. I need to love you a whole hell of a lot more and like myself a lot less. Right. I like myself way too much.
Let us love you till you can love yourself, right? Jeez. That's all I need is just to love myself a little bit more.
I mean, the book says we got to quit playing God, right? So, Susie, don't tell us you suffer from low self-esteem and need to like yourself anymore. You need to like yourself less and love all of us more.
So how do you get experience writing inventory? How do you get 13 years or 26 years or 25 years or 30 years experience writing inventory? By writing inventory for 15 years or 25 years or 30 years. You carve inventory out of your ass, one piece of inventory at a time, right? I remember the first time my spiritual advisor, I have a woman, She's a spiritual advisor. She runs the Denver Central office. Her name's Lynn Byron. And I'll tell you, me saying that on a tape, this is how this thing works. A regular talk at a convention, it's just got your name, Joe H. And if they don't think to call the taper and ask for your phone number, how would they ever know who to call? They wouldn't. But on the tape, I mentioned my spiritual advisor, Lynn B., who runs the Denver Central office. A guy from Australia heard the tape, called the Denver Central office, and asked Lynn B. for my phone number. I've been his sponsor ever since, and I get to go to Australia this year. Right. So Lynn B., my spiritual advisor, when I'm about 10 years sober, she says, cutest little lady. She's 36 years sober, been doing the work 36 years. Been through the work every year for 36 years. She says, can I read a piece of inventory to you? I'm like, whoa, this is going to be like really heavy. It was the pettiest, stupidest resentment, just like mine, that I ever heard. And it freed me up to be human. It wasn't any different than any of my inventory. 36 years sober, willing to submit herself to this process every single year. She's the most alive 70-year-old woman I've ever met in my life, let alone in AA. She's an artist. She runs that Denver Central office. Terribly involved with her family and the opera and music. Loves rock and roll, loves AA, still sponsors women. She's alive. 36 years old.
Let's go on to next inventory. Notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and his wife.
Marking fear next to the third column gets a little redundant, but it is powerful because you see, anytime any one of those 7 areas in the resentment inventory is hurt, threatened, or interfered with, there's always fear involved.
So you can develop a fear inventory from your third column and fourth column of your resentment inventory. But let's go on and read about fear. Fear touches every aspect of my life. Fear was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of my existence was shot through with fear. Fear set in motion trains of circumstances which brought me misfortune I felt I didn't deserve. But did not I myself set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. Fear seems to cause more trouble. So I reviewed my fears thoroughly. I put them on paper. So now I have instructions. I'm going to do my fear inventory on paper.
Before we start the instructions for the fear inventory, let's go back to one idea, and we'll come back to it in a minute. Fear ought to be classed with stealing. That always confused me because I don't think they were writing this book for kleptomaniacs. I think they were writing the book for alcoholics. And for an alcoholic, stealing is a conscious decision. So my friend says to me, it also goes along with didn't we ourselves set the ball rolling. My friend says to me, is it possible that fear that is a conscious decision? Is it possible fear is a conscious decision? And I said to him, what do you mean? He said, we'll come back to it in a minute. So now the instructions.
So it says, I reviewed my fears thoroughly.
They're in the fourth column. They're right there for you. Go through the entire fourth column without any repeats and make a list of fears. There's only so many. Don't repeat any more than once. Rejection, pain, being alone, looking bad, not getting what I want, pleasure, being with someone, success. They're all in your fourth column under afraid. They've all been correlated right down at the bottom of your fourth column.
So it says I put them on paper even though I have no resentment and connection with them.
So before the list is done, you pray. Please show me any fears that didn't make my resentment inventory. It's because you got some fears in your consciousness that weren't in the resentment inventory. Snakes, heights, bugs. So how do you know when the fear list is done? You keep working on the fear list until you know it's done. It's only 2-column inventory, and the next sentence gives you the second column.
It says, I need to ask myself why I had them.
So what does the fear inventory sound like? Once your list is done, you take the first fear off your list, put it on a piece of paper. Rejection. Why am I afraid of rejection? It's painful. I'll be alone. I'll drink, and I'll die. Break it down. Some people say there's a third column, and that is with that fear, does self-reliance fail? But all you would be putting next to all those fears would be yes, because self-reliance fails with every fear. So we just write 2 column. We've now, and there are going to be some stuff in these things we're going to give you, we've now evolved and had experience enough to where we write 4 column fear inventory. But that takes a lot of years of writing fear inventory till you can start to break your fears down to where you see there's really only about 10 or 20. Then you're going to see there's really only about 2. We think we live with all these fears. There's only 2 fears. You just each put different names on them. But we now take about 20 fears, positive and negative. We'll take like being alone, pain, rejection, drinking, dying. We'll take 10 negative fears and we'll take 10 positive fears. They're direct opposites. And we'll write a 4 column inventory on each one of those. But for now, you're just listing fears, taking the fear off your list, putting it on a piece of paper, and in the 2nd column answering why you're afraid of that. Isn't it because self-reliance failed? Self-reliance is good as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. Some of us had great self-confidence, but self-confidence doesn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When self-confidence makes you cocky, fear becomes worse. So back to my question. Is it possible fear is a conscious decision? And I look at my first fear list, my first fear inventory, and I got about 100 fears throughout this resentment inventory. There was about 20 that came when I prayed. I got all these fears, and I say to my friend, you're telling me that I made a conscious decision to be afraid of rejection or snakes or heights? He says, I'm going to show you one decision you made on a regular basis that sets up every fear you've ever had. I said, what's that? He said, there is a conscious decision that we all make on a regular basis which sets up every fear we've ever had. I said, what's that? He said, to rely on yourself where fear is concerned.
Instead of God.
And there's the conscious decision that sets up all my fears. And I set the ball rolling, and fear is like stealing because I make a conscious decision to rely on me where fear is concerned. Therefore, fear is a conscious decision.
Your fear inventory should show you that fear is an evil corroding thread. The fabric of your existence is shot through with fear. I mean, I've written enough fear inventories. I was telling a gentleman this earlier. The day before I came into AA, I would have told you I was pretty fearless. Raised in a family, 4 boys, Vietnam, time in the streets, tough. I was sober 3 years before I lost the fear of getting up in the middle of the meeting and go to the bathroom. I mean, I would get literally sick in meetings, but I'm sitting in this chair, I'm so packed with fear because afraid to get up and afraid someone's going to say something to me. The fabric of my existence was shot through with fear. I mean, I'd be sitting home alone, and I'd be afraid of being home alone, so I'd get in my car and I'd drive to the meeting. Then I'm sitting outside, and I'm afraid I go in the meeting, I got to talk to people, and I don't know a lot of them. Then I'm sitting in the meeting, and I'm afraid they're going to call on me, and then I'm afraid you're not going to call on me. Then I'm afraid you're going to call me, and I don't know what I'm going to say, and then I said it, and then I'm afraid of what I said. I mean, it's
so like... So I don't go to the meeting.
Yeah. Or I'm afraid of being alone, right? Not being in a relationship. See, I had to see the connection between fear moves me into action, tremendous action, or moves me into no action. I had to see the times that the fear of being alone led me to get into relationships that did not fit any kind of a sane and sound ideal. And now I'm in the relationship, and now the one fear of being alone's magnified into 20, because she's going to leave. It's just a matter of time. I had to see the fabric of my existence was shot through with fear. I had a fear that I couldn't stay sober. I had a fear that I'd die drunk. I had a fear of living. I had a fear of dying. I mean, the fabric of my existence was shot through with fear. When I had a bunch of money, I was afraid I couldn't keep it. And when I didn't have any, I was afraid I wouldn't get any. I mean, it was incredible to me.
We wonder why we're confused. One day I'm afraid of success, the next day I'm afraid of failure. I do something right, you ask me how I do it, I know it was by accident the first time, and I don't know how to do it, and I stay in fear. And you reach a point in Alcoholics Anonymous where you get sick and tired of using fear to overcome fear. How long can you keep using fear to overcome fear? I'll tell you how my mind works with resentment. My mind works like this. I'm sitting in a crowded room and I'm new in Alcoholics Anonymous and it's smoky and everybody's drinking coffee and she enters the room. You know? She, her. And our eyes meet and there's a little connection. She thinks maybe he's a nice guy. Wonder what he would be like. And I think, what are we going to name our children? And let's see, the wedding will be, and we'll be together. We'll be together for about 2.5 years, and then she's going to dump me because I did this, and this, and I'm getting really mad now. And I don't say a word to her after the meeting because of this relationship that we've had, and she's wondering why I didn't say nothing because there was this little connection, and she enjoyed the meeting, and I sat there and went through our entire history.
And depending how far I go, I may even tell my friends about it.
I've carried on entire relationships in my mind, and the other person has never known.
Now let's look at the
Was it as good for you as it was for me? Right? Yeah.
I'll give you a useful tool. Those of you who are getting in touch with the amount of fears you have, the next 2 paragraphs give us a way to go. It says, perhaps there's a better way, we think so. For now I am on a different basis. I'm on the basis of trusting and relying upon God. I trust infinite God rather than my finite self. I am in the world to play the role that God assigns. Just to the extent that I do as I think God would have me and humbly rely on Him, does He enable me to match calamity with serenity. I never apologize to anyone for depending upon my Creator. I can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, spirituality is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. Now I'm going to get what I think is the best definition of courage I've ever seen. It says all men of faith have courage. Here's the definition of courage. They, men of faith, trust their God. That's the best definition of courage I ever heard. Mark, do you trust God? Mark, she's left, you've lost the job. You're sitting in your apartment, you're scared to death. Mark, do you trust God? Do you really trust God, Mark? That's courage. Best definition of courage I ever heard. I never apologize for God. I never apologize for God. Susie made this comment. Someone said to her, Susie, you got to quit talking about God so much in meetings. That's all this program's about, is developing a relationship with the power greater than yourself. Instead, I let God demonstrate through me what God can do. Of myself I am nothing. The Father doeth the works. I didn't do anything here this weekend. God did what God does here this weekend. I do nothing without God. So of myself I am nothing. So again, I'm going to let God demonstrate through me what God can do. So here's the tool. Anytime I feel fear, I ask God to remove my fear, direct my attention to what He had me be. My 3rd step, decision. I'm to be His actor, His agent, and His child, and absolutely trust and rely on Him. He will take care of me.
We're not what we do.
You are not what you do. If you don't get free of that, you're in deep trouble.
Tell them what happens when you get hooked into what you are is what you do.
Phew. I'll take a personal experience. My first 7...
No, the nut house.
Huh? The nut house? Which one?
Which one?
What story are you thinking of?
When you were a salesman and that had to be broken and you ended up in a nut house.
Oh, God, yeah. My first 7.5 years, I went to work for a company in Denver, Colorado in sobriety. And I wound up managing some stores and having a lot of responsibility and everything else that goes along with that. And Jeff knew me during this time period. I was working a lot of hours, 65 to 90 hours a week sometimes. And I'll tell you what happened is I finally wound up quitting that job. I was in some severe self-delusion in many areas. But I got to tell you what happened. After I quit that job, very quickly I began to get moved into a major depression. Now, I couldn't figure all this out at the time. So anyhow, I wind up in this nut house, and I really started looking at this, and I'll tell you exactly what happened to me. There was a part of me that became so attached to working at that job and everything that job went along with, that when I was no longer doing that job, that part of me thought it was going to die, and it damn near took me out of here. And all of a sudden I began to look at other times in my life when she left and I thought I was going to die, and I began to see there was a part of me that thinks that's who I am because I'm with this woman. You see? I begin to learn the fatal lesson in thinking that what I do has anything to do with who I am. What I am is a child of God in the world to play the role He has assigned. Other spiritual books talk about non-attachment. My dependency is on God. I ask God to help me be attached to nothing, you see? Because here's what I know based on my experience. Everything Mark Houston dearly loves in his life could be taken from me in a day. Every human being I love could die in a day. And my job could be gone today. And my health could go today. And if I'm attached to any of that stuff, I'm going with it. I'm going with it, you see? In steps 4 through 9, put me back in touch with what I am, which is a child of God. Middle ground. Some days I'm a good member of AA, and some days I'm not so good. Some days I'm a good friend, and some days I'm not so good. You see?
Friend says today, she writes 5th column. So she said, I think it's a great idea. I said, what's the 5th column? She says, well, after I write, I'm talking about resentment. She says, after I write who I'm mad at, and why I'm mad, and how it affects me, and where I'm at fault, then I write what should I do instead in the future. And I drew this picture for where this man did this thing, because I used to think that was cool too, until I saw how that's playing God. This man did this exercise. I wish we could do it today, but we can't. This man did this exercise, the most powerful thing I've ever seen done with a group concerning the 4th step. He puts a girl in the middle of the room. He's got a blackboard, and on the blackboard it says 1st and 2nd column. She puts her 1st column as her boss. 2nd column threatens to fire me if I don't put things just right on her desk. 3rd column, self-esteem. He says, why does that affect your self-esteem? She says, because I'm unworthy and I don't deserve the job anyway. He says, if that was true at the core of your being, if self-esteem when you're angry is the biggest lie in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't have low self-esteem when I'm angry. And it's the ego's job to convince me I do. Because if not being worthy of that job and being a piece of you-know-what was at the core of your being, you wouldn't get mad. You'd sit there like a lump and say, I don't deserve this job anyway. But you get mad. You get mad because there's this other voice that needs to be explored during 4 through 9 that goes, I'm really queen of the office, and nobody should talk to me that way or threaten my job because I'm the queen of the office. So he brings the queen of the office up to stand next to her. He says, why else does your self-esteem get affected when your boss threatens to fire you? She says, well, there's a part of me that thinks I'm a little sex kitten who should be at home being supported by some rich guy watching soap operas and eating bonbons. He brings up the sex kitten. By the time he's done, he's got 10 personalities standing around this girl, and he goes, no wonder the men you're with are confused. You never know which one's going to wake up on any given day. He's got the overachiever, he's got the underachiever, he's got the passive girl, he's got the aggressive girl, he's got the nun, the whore, the sex kitten, the queen of the office. He's got 10 personalities standing around this girl, and he says, some of them don't even know the others exist. And you never know which one's going to... In AA, we call it the committee. And you never know which one's going to be... No wonder the women I've been with have been confused, because you never know which one of me is going to wake up, let alone I'm a Gemini. You never know. There's 2 for every 2.
And then check this out. Then boy meets girl in AA. So here's what happens, right? You've got the girl in AA with her 10 characters and the guy in AA with 10 characters. So here's what happens. Of course, as soon as you come into AA, immediately you have the spiritual woman and you have the spiritual man. But here's what happens one night. The sex kitten goes to bed, and in walks the spiritual man seeking God. I think we're going to have a problem here. Right?
See, we only get along when the lover meets the lover.
Right.
They're both awake on the same day.
I mean, you go to bed at night, there's probably 50 people in that bed. Hell, it's no wonder it don't work out. 4 through 9 take you to the middle ground. Atonement at 1.
If the great worker works up and the lover wakes up, one wants to stay in bed and one's got to get to work because he's got to do this and this and this and this. The next day, his lover wakes up and her overachiever wakes up and she's got to get to work. But I wonder why you didn't want to do what you wanted to do yesterday, because you didn't know who the fuck was going to wake up that day. So he gives this example, and the point of the whole story is, if you start to use steps 4 through 9 to solve problems with your boss that's going to fire you, and you write a piece of 4-column inventory and you go, my God, look at what I've been up to. I've been so passive. So now I'll. So you got to watch when you're writing 4-column resentment inventory that your ego doesn't go, so now I'll, because then all they do is get up and change seats. What if that's not what God wants? You don't write inventory to solve problems. You write inventory to seek God so those personalities will die and you'll become at one. If those personalities don't die between 4 and 9, there's a whole other scenario he can take you through that of excuses they'll come up with to not make amends. Yeah. Every one of them will have a different story. Those personalities must die in 4 through 9 or they only get up and change seats. Yeah. So you do not write inventory to go, oh my God, look at what I've been up to, so now I think I better.
You're trying to write inventory to create yourself in your own image. The problem with it, a lot of times people who do this, what they'll do, you can always tell, they'll kiss a lot of butt in the A for about 2 weeks, but then pretty soon the real self comes back again. You see, that is...
After a fifth step, they'll be like, I've just done 17 fifth steps, and now I've seen the light because I'm going to be more... Right?
So, let's move on. One last thing, the promise, if I'll do this fear prayer, at once I will commence to outgrow fear. Doesn't say I won't have fear, it says I'll grow it. So, now we're going to get to now about sex. Now this is an interesting topic. I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous almost 13 years. And I'll bet you that the number of times this topic has been in meetings in the time that I've been around is less than 10. I find this extremely interesting because it seems like when I get phone calls from people I sponsor, this is about all we're going to talk about. But we don't talk about this in meetings. I'm just going to have you all consider that. I don't know what the hell this is about. Of course, I've done enough fifth steps to know that the secrets are normally about something to do with animals or whatever, but I want you to consider this and consider starting to bring this topic to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know? So now about sex. Many of us need an overhauling there. It's an interesting word, an overhauling.
Susie.
But above all, I try to be sensible on this question. Question of sex. Because why? It's so easy to get way off the track. Here I'll find human opinions running to extremes. Absurd extremes, perhaps. One set of voices cry sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then I have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it or isn't the right kind. They see sex's significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. I'm going to read that again. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct.
A friend of mine used to say, you know how they tell you no relationships your first year, but nobody knows if that works or not because nobody's ever done it.
There is an instruction in there. I never tell anyone what to do in a relationship. Jeff and I just talked about this. The best that I can do is have you pick up the tools in the big book because I'm not God. And I believe it's extremely arrogant for anyone in this room to sit down and tell someone else whether they should be or not be in a relationship. That's not what the big book says. It says, Mark, you're not the arbiter of anyone's sexual relationship. If you're sponsoring someone and they come to you with relationship problems, I do not see it as my role to tell them to be in it or out of it. Who do I think I am? I am not God. But I can point them into some tools to pick up so they can come to their own truth about this thing. So it goes on to say, we all have sex problems. No one in here is exempt. We hardly be human if we didn't. Well, what can we do about it? Now we're going to get the paragraph that's going to give us instructions for our sex inventory. So it starts out. Mark reviewed his conduct over the years past.
Two ways of approaching that. First time I wrote sex inventory, my sponsor said, we reviewed our conduct over the years past. That means to make a list of relationships. Then the next time somebody said that means to review the specific conduct in each of those relationships, so now we do both. So the first instruction is this. Make a list of relationships you'd like to examine that are revealed to you when you pray. This inventory is not about sex, so some names might come that you might want to run through these questions that don't have to do with sex. And I would challenge some of you that have been around for a while, that was an eye-opening experience, because those of you that have been around for a while, some of you do claim the most important relationship in your life is that your relationship with God. Put God on your list for your sex inventory and run it through the 9 questions we're going to take you through. It made for an interesting piece of inventory. But I just prayed, and by this time I'm so sick of making lists I can scream. I'm making another list. How will you know when the list is done? You'll know when the list is done. Take the first name off the list, put it on the top of a piece of paper, and this inventory is going to be done in paragraph form. First of all, with this same instruction that he just read, we reviewed our conduct over the years past. Write a history of that relationship from beginning to end. Put in pertinent points, major turning points, put in specific sex conduct, and how it began, your motives for getting involved, and how it ended. Then when the history is complete, turn the page. Maybe you took up the front, maybe you took the front and the back. Take another piece of paper, and in paragraph form, answer these 9 questions. Where were you selfish? With explanations. Where were you dishonest? Number 2. Number 3, where were you inconsiderate? Number 4, who was hurt? Look around the relationship. Maybe her kids were hurt, maybe her brother was hurt, maybe her parents were hurt, her boyfriend, her husband. Where did you arouse jealousy? Number 5. Where did you arouse suspicion? Number 6. Where did you arouse bitterness? Number 7. Number 8, where were you at fault? Sums up the whole deal. Number 9, do not write this if you don't want to change. What should you have done instead? The only part of the inventory my sponsor warned me about, and he said, do not answer question number 9 in the sex inventory if you don't want to change in that area. And I wrote it because I wanted to change, and it was changed. It was changed for me. So we answer those 9 questions. I worked on the list until I knew it was done. I took the first name off the list, and I wrote a history about that relationship. You'll find here in a page or so it talks about this inventory is about motives in relationships. I included in that history specific sex conduct. I included in that history my motives for getting involved. I included in that history turning points. She did this, and then I did this, and then she did that, and then I concluded with how it ended. And then I wrote about where I was selfish. I did this and this and this, did this. Where was I dishonest? I was dishonest about this and this and this, and I didn't tell her this, and I didn't do this. I was inconsiderate when I did this. I was inconsiderate when I did this and this and this. Who did I hurt? I hurt her. I hurt her parents. I hurt her kid.
Look around the relationship.
I aroused jealousy when I did this and this and this. I aroused suspicion when I did that and that and that. I aroused bitterness when I did this and this and snuck around and cheated, and she didn't know where I was or what I was doing. Where was I at fault? I kind of take a few lines and I sum up everything I've seen so far. I expected her to be like this, and I thought I was going to be like this, and I thought this was going to be like this. What should I have done instead? 9 times out of 10, I shouldn't have. Thank God it doesn't say could. If it said could, I could just beat myself to death in this inventory. It says should. I couldn't have done nothing different with the amount of power I currently had. I should have done a lot different if I would have had more power in my life. And one of the things I should have done was not get involved in the first place, or been more kind, or considerate, or honest, if I would have had the power. It's not about beating yourself up in this inventory. It's about getting free. It's about facing What's blocking you from God and admitting the exact nature of your wrong? But not admitting the exact nature of your wrong in a way where you sit there and bloody yourself up for what a rotten, terrible person you are. That's just ego. That's just the other end of ego. Right? It's about admitting the exact nature of your wrong to get free. To see your troubles with her weren't of her making. To see, look at how you brought this stuff on. Because if your troubles were of any of these people's making, they got to change or come back from the dead or do something for you to get free. Thank God everyone on every one of these lists, none of my troubles were of their making. Thank God. And we talked about, we were going to go back to that statement on page 62. So our troubles were basically of our own making before we got to the fourth column, and we didn't. But the way to go into that before you get to the fourth column is to go to our troubles are of our own making and look for the positive side to that statement. So before you write any of this 4-column stuff in the resentment inventory or looking at your part with fear or looking at what you did in the sex inventory, go back to that statement. Our troubles are basically of our own making, and find the positive side to that statement. And if you feel during the inventory you're beating yourself up and it's just ego, and you catch yourself and you're feeling really terrible, not that this shouldn't crack your ego open. There's a difference between your ego being smashed and beating yourself up in a negative way. You start to feel open, it begins to feel free and painful. You beat yourself up, it just feels terrible. And if you drift back into that, go back to our troubles are of our own making and find the positive side to that statement. Now I know the negative side. My troubles are of my own making. Look at what a rotten, terrible person I am. The positive side to that statement is, my troubles are of my own making. Thank God, because they don't have to do a thing for me to get free. Let's just take my first resentment, my oldest one, the one that I had since my earliest memory, toward a man who was 67 by the time I was 10. And I'm in my first inventory, and I'm getting to the fourth column, and I go to the noon meeting, and I said, for the first time in 30 years, I'm starting to feel some forgiveness in my heart for a man who was 67 by the time I was 10. Do you people in the room think that I'll be able to make amends to someone who's been dead for 9 years? 3/4 of the room, and I hate to say this, but 3/4 of the room, every time I've ever wanted to get free in AA, says that I can't. So 3/4 of the room says, can't make amends to someone who's dead, or when I was a year and a half. Can't go to Mexico where there's no AA, or when I was 3. Can't speak at the International, you're only 3. Or when I wanted to finish amends. Can't finish amends, that's impossible. 3/4 of the room has always told me I can't get free, and thank God for the other 1/4 of you people that I choose to stick with, the winners, who say, sure, you can make amends to your dad when you get to the 9th step. Just do what your sponsor says when you get to step 9. And I got to go to his grave and make amends and get free. And thank God, if my troubles were of my old man's making, he had to come back from the dead for me to get free. He'd been dead 9 years. How am I going to get free if my troubles were of his making? If my old lady's gone and she's left me and she ain't coming back, how am I going to get free if my troubles are of her making? I got to see my troubles are of my own making. And I got to go to Mexico when I was a year and a half and find out it was about me and God. Came back in better shape than when I left. 3/4 of the room said, AA's your gas station. Got to go every day. Got to get filled up. Got to work on that insurance policy. Right? Like George Bush or something. Can't do that. Wouldn't be prudent. Right? Went to Mexico. Came back free. Spoke at the International when I was 3 years sober. Shouldn't be doing that. I know I shouldn't be doing that. I shouldn't even be sober. Right? God is either... You know what those in the room that said I couldn't do all those things? You know what they were expressing? Their own agnosticism. You know what they were saying underneath it all? God isn't everything. He's finite. He's measurable. Can't take him to the grave. Can't take him to Mexico. Can't take him to the International. And you certainly can't use him. Mark was at a meeting one time in Texas. He heard a man say, thinking that you can finish amends is as arrogant as thinking as you could take a feather pillow to the top of a building and throw all the feathers off the top of the Empire State Building and think you can go find every one of those feathers. Mark says to the guy, what if you were in touch with that which created the feathers and the pillow and you? Could you find every one of them? God is either everything or is nothing. He either is or he isn't. In the middle of all this, I get to get free C, and my part.
It goes on to say, what should we have done instead? Most of our inventories in this area should point out very clearly we should never have been in the relationship. We get this all down paper, we look at it. It says in this way, doing the inventory we just talked about. Mark tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for his future sex life. Now I'll give you an exercise. Take a dictionary, look up the word sane, look up the word sound, look up the word ideal. Sane and sound ideal for Mark's future sex life. Mark's going to subject each relationship to this test. Was it, the relationship, selfish or not? Mark's going to ask God to mold Mark's ideals and help Mark to live up to them. Why? Because my experience is I don't have the power to live up to them. Mark needs to remember always, Mark's sex powers were God-given and therefore they are good, neither to be used lightly or selflessly, nor to be despised and loathed. Whatever Mark's ideal turns out to be, Mark must be willing to grow toward it, his ideal. Mark must be willing to make amends where Mark has done harm, provided Mark does not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, Mark is going to treat sex as Mark would any other problem. Now this is an interesting sentence. In meditation, Mark is going to ask God what Mark should do about each specific matter, and the promise is the right answer will come if Mark wants the right answer. It'll come from inside me. God alone can judge Mark's sex situation. Counsel with other persons is often desirable, but Mark's going to let God be the final judge. Mark needs to realize some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. Mark needs to avoid both hysterical thinking or hysterical advice. Now, let's say that I've looked up sane, sound, and ideal, and I've prayed. Some things have come to me, and I've written out this sane and sound ideal. I'll just give you one component. And this is about what I'm going to bring to the table and what I would like a woman in my life to bring to the table. And any woman. A desire to have God as a central fact of their life. That's one component of my sane and sound ideal. Just one component. Suppose I fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean Mark's going to get drunk? Some people tell Mark so. But this is only half-truth. Mark getting drunk. Pay attention to this. Mark getting drunk, it depends on Mark and Mark's motives. If Mark is sorry for what he's done and Mark has the honest desire to let God take Mark to better things, Mark can't take Mark to better things. We believe Mark will be forgiven and Mark will have learned his lesson. Big warning, if Mark is not sorry and Mark's conduct continues to harm others, Mark is quite sure to drink. We're not theorizing, these are facts out of our experience. So, right now I'm working with this next paragraph, because I've done all this work recently. So to sum up about sex, now I'm going to get 4 prayers, and I do this 2 times a day. 1, Mark earnestly prays for the right ideal. 2, guidance in each questionable situation. 3, for sanity. 4, for the strength to do the right thing. Powerful. If sex is very troublesome, Mark needs to throw himself the harder into helping others. Mark needs to think of their needs and work for them. This takes Mark's out of himself. Here again, working with others, will quiet the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. And that's the end of the 3 inventories. A lot of work here in this area on relationships. I have a lot of experience with this. Married and divorced 4 times. 2 times in sobriety. A lot of relationships. Had to do a lot of work. And I'm here to tell you, I'm not the person I was a year ago. And God has done for me what I could not do for myself. We're going to stop there, because tomorrow we're going to pick up and finish off with 2 more sessions on 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then
2 things.
10, 11, 12.
I'd like to say just a couple things about the most overlooked part of this inventory. We've talked about 3 inventories. We've talked about a 4-column resentment inventory, who I'm mad at, why, how it affects the 7 areas of my life, and then my part. We've talked about a 2-column fear inventory, listing the fears and asking why you have them. We've talked about a 9-question sex inventory with a detailed history of that relationship. I think the most overlooked part of the inventory that the book is real specific about, it says it's a chosen ideal, it says you should ask God to help mold it, is, at the end of all this, writing out a sex ideal for your future. And I would encourage you to use question number 9 from the sex inventory, what should I have done instead, as a guide to molding your ideal. And of course, prayer. But when I've written out question number 9, and I can even mark it so I can easily refer back to it, of what I should have done instead, it gives me a great guide of what I can do in the future with power of God in my life. I'd also like to talk about, when all this is done, jotting down any secrets that are in your consciousness that didn't make the inventory. If they're not in the resentment inventory, or the fear inventory, or the sex inventory, they call it take it to the grave stuff. Jot down those secrets just enough so you can read them to the person you're reading to, so you can meet this requirement at the end of the 5th step. You've withheld nothing. Nothing that you're consciously aware of. We're on page 70. Let's talk about what we've covered for a minute. My name's Joe. I'm an alcoholic.
Joe.
We've covered from the title page to the bottom of page 70. And we've talked about a 3-part program for a 3-part disease with 36 spiritual principles. We've talked about specific pages to use for the 1st and 2nd step, and then just to, from there on, the book tells you what step you're at. And, we talked about the growth of the fellowship from 39 to 55, and we talked about the growth of the fellowship from 55 to 76, and additions to each of the printings, and additions to each of the additions. We talked about using specific pages from the doctor's opinion to the top of 23 to look at the physical craving for alcohol. And pretty much past there, you won't find much in the book about what happens once you take a drink. And we talked about really only needing to be convinced of one thing before you go past page 23, and that is, does my experience abundantly confirm that once I put alcohol in my system, something happens which makes it virtually impossible for me to stop? Those pages get into other things, like with Bill's story and stuff about the fellowship and stuff about the other steps, but really, to go past page 23, you just need to be clear what happens when you put alcohol in your system, or drugs, or both. And as far as the craving is concerned, what you see yourself as, an addict, an alcoholic, or both. We talked about a lot Friday night, specific differences between drug addiction and alcoholism, and giving people you work with and yourself the grace and dignity to find out your own truth. Some people can be one, some people can be the other, some people can be both. We're going to only use 2 criteria to see if you're an alcoholic or an addict or both. What happens with the craving and what happens with the obsession. I told you how I found my truth. I'm not a drug addict. Right? I did a lot of drugs. But I made up my mind on my own power without God or any help or any program, and I walked away from drugs. I do not have that mental part of the disease that continues. I talk to an addict, I lose them. Because they say, I can't comprehend how you walked away from heroin like that. I can't comprehend how you walked away from cocaine like that, because I've been making up my mind for years and years and years, and I need power. I need power other than my own to keep from drugs. I didn't. That just happens to be my truth. We talked about specific pages from 23 to 43. To look at the mental obsession. This thing that will take each and every one of us out of here. The thing that will get us today. The physical craving ain't going to happen to nobody in this room until this thing happens. Until this thing goes on. Until this lie is presented to my mind, or I don't even think at all, and I find myself having taken a drink or a drug, wondering how it happened. And if the power of God is not there that day, I'm a dead man. I don't know what will happen. We talked about how to use those sections, how to use the doctor's opinion and Bill's story and 17 to 23, how to use 23 to 43. And the greatest tool that we were able to share with you is that When the book makes a statement, you turn it into a question and simply bring the question to your heart and let it be answered rather than thinking you have to answer it. We talked about how to make a consideration rather than answer a question. The most important thing with these questions is not the answer. The most important thing is what happens between asking it and answering it. When you wonder about it, when you're in the middle, when you're in that magical place where movement can take place, you're not sure, you're not the man with all the answers, you're not set as to what's the truth. You're in that magical middle place, looking at both sides of the question, wondering about it. We talked about a prayer to use from the very beginning till the third step, in your own words. To ask that what you think you know be put aside just long enough for an open mind and a new experience. We talked about 3 specific pages to look at the unmanageability, the third part of the first step, the spirit. Body and the mind are simple. You can either control booze when you got it in your system or you can't. And you can either keep yourself stopped once you've stopped or you can't. Those are the symptoms, body and mind. And none of us in this room like to think we're bodily and mentally different from our fellows, and the ego does not like me to admit that. It kicks up. It tries everything it can, every form of self-delusion that it possibly can raise to convince me that I'm not an alcoholic. That's its job. And something more powerful than that must come in to smash that. And the delusion that I'm like other people drinking, let alone presently, has to be smashed. We talked about how to look at the unmanageability. 44, 45, 52. The middle paragraph on 52 describes the spiritual malady. We looked at even 3 ways of looking at page 52. How well do I do with each of these areas on my own power? How well would I do if all these areas were all in a row, the times I had all my ducks in a row and things were pretty good, would that be enough for me to stay sober and I still drank? Then we looked at the one that brings us up to date with the unmanageability, and that is, how well am I currently doing with the power of God that I've been given with each area on page 52? And it smashes me, because I get to see what I do with power. Because, see, I don't operate in the world on my own power anymore. I operate in the world, at least I say that I do, at least I base my life and my actions on the fact that I've got power in my life other than my own today. What do I do with that power? I run relationships into the ground. I can't control my emotional nature. Misery and depression start to creep in, and here I am starting the work again, 13 years sober, in the middle of a 4-step, right? Because of what I do with power, what my ego does to rebuild itself, and my need for doing this work on a regular basis. We talked about 2 parts to the second step. Simple exercise for each part. We talked about the willingness to believe is a big step for some people when you're new, and it takes you nowhere when you've been around for a while. But if you add just a little bit to that, for those of us that have been around, do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than yourself that can take you beyond where you are in every area of your life, and that past here there may be levels of peace and freedom and existence and power and consciousness and silence that you can't even imagine? Do I believe that? And I'm brought to my own doubt. I'm brought to my own agnosticism. I'm brought to the current stuff that's killing me. And it's directly connected to the unmanageability that I experienced when I looked at what I do with power with each area on page 52. My agnosticism is always connected to my unmanageability. We talked about how do you move from that simple willingness and admitting that you have some doubt and some current agnosticism to choosing, once again, God is everything or He's nothing. I mean, if you were a Buddhist, if you were a Buddhist or a skeptic, or you were somebody who said, gee, I don't know about this power and I'm going to do this work purely based on skepticism. I'm going to do this from the point of view that nothing is just as much as everything. Why couldn't you choose God as nothing and start the work and let the experience be shown to you? Why would it have? It says, fearlessly face the proposition, and I don't know about you, but when I'm faced with a proposition, I get to make a choice, and it even says, what is your choice to be? I get to choose. That's a statement of grace. How do people like you and I get taken from a place where we're shown truth that we can't even see in step 1? We're moved through the first step to see our own hopelessness. We have a little bit of willingness that comes from that hopelessness. We can't muster it up ourselves. And all we can say is, I've got some doubt about God, but I'm willing to believe He can take me past where I am. How do we get taken to a place where we get to not only choose God, but decide at the third step what we'd like God to be and what we'd like to be in relationship to terms that you get to choose? Director, principal, father. Maybe there's other terms you want to work with. Actor, agent, child. Before we made that decision yesterday and got on our knees and did that prayer, we also had to be convinced of three pertinent ideas: A, B, C. And we all sat here and said we are convinced that we're alcoholic or addict or both. We cannot manage our own lives. No human power can relieve what we suffer from, that we can come up with. And that we're willing to believe that God not only can, but that He will for me as I am if I seek Him. You don't have to clean up to go to God. Right? You don't have to get good to go to God. This ain't about becoming Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. This is about getting well, not good. We've seen people try to get good in this program, right? Damn near kill it. Well, it does. It kills people. We've also seen people who have been plagued with the belief and the myth in Alcoholics Anonymous that you have to stay sick, and it's killed them. Neither's true. We looked at, after being convinced of those ABCs, the requirement to take the third step, and that is each of us were convinced in our own way that our lives run on self-will cannot be successful. They gave us about a page and a half that just drives you into the ground when you see how you live your life when running on self-will. Even when your motives are good, even when trying to be kind, and even in your best moments, what you produce and how it doesn't work. And why we need to quit playing God and it doesn't work. And why it doesn't work. Then we got to make that wonderful decision that I think is another place of grace, another pocket of power, where one gets to move past where they are, or see themselves move past where they are. To make that third step decision, we got on our knees, we did that prayer. We moved directly into inventory, and we talked about a 4-column resentment inventory. Who I'm mad at, why, how it affects me, and my part, where I'm selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and frightened, with explanations, written out. Written out 4th column, that everything you're going to need for step 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 is going to come from the detailed 4th column. That's how important the 4th column is, and isn't it screwed up that the important things I can't make happen. I can't bring myself to the truth that needs to be revealed in column 4. Therefore, there's my need for God once again, and I'm driven deeper into my own powerlessness and not further away. If you begin to have an experience where the further you get from one, the further you get from one, something's wrong. And you should go back. Not wrong, but you're missing something. And you should go back and do a quick review from the point of view of powerlessness. Because each step after it should drive you deeper into the first step. I get to see this powerlessness and this unmanageability in black and white as I'm writing it down on paper. And stuff's coming off the end of my pen that I don't connect with up here because my inventory is not being written from up here in my head. My inventory can be and should be written from a place down here where it's coming to me rather than me manufacturing it in my head. And stuff will come off the end of your pen that you won't understand because it's not coming from the place that understands. We talked about a fear inventory. 2-column, list the fears and why you have them. If you feel so inclined, maybe taking 10 or 15 or 20 fears and writing 4 columns on each one. We talked about a sex inventory with the name and praying to make a list of relationships that need to be examined and trusting that prayer. Going with what comes. It's not about sex, it's about relationships and my motives and sex. It's about those 3 things. And putting that name on top of a piece of paper and writing a history of that relationship. And then answering 9 specific questions in paragraph form. We talked about writing an ideal for the future, asking God to help mold it, and writing out, using question number 9 from the sex inventory of what should I have done in the past instead, as kind of a guide as to what can I do in the future with power in my life to shape a sane and sound ideal. We talked about anything that might be left in your consciousness, secrets that you think you would take to the grave, made note of to read in your fifth step. And here we are. That's a different state of consciousness than when we started. All that shifts here is that. All that ever shifts here is that. Mommy and Daddy haven't changed. Your brothers and sisters haven't changed. No one's done anything. You could have sat in a chair and moved through each of those states of consciousness and watched that all that really changes is perception of self, perception of others, and perceptions of power that was already there.
I'm Mark. I'm an alcoholic. Some of the things we've tried to impress upon you based on our experiences, how interconnected these steps are, and in particular, they're all connected to the foundation of the spiritual arts, which is step 1. We've talked to you about steps 2 through 12. Any balking has nothing to do with that step. It's about looking at your experience and your truth in step 1. And we talked about and broke down the idea that, the big book spends about 62 pages having you look at your experience to find your truth in step 1. Next 12 steps or next 11 steps are covered in about 40 pages. So it all hinges on step 1 and my truth in step 1. Anybody saying they're struggling with any step from 2 through 12 is not struggling with that step. And we're hoping that you can see that. We tried to impress upon you to have a different attitude about writing inventory. When you've had an experience with the first 3 steps and considered those steps and made that decision, we tried to impress upon you to get excited about writing inventory so you can face and be rid of that which has you blocked from the only thing that's going to give you any sense of sobriety, any sense of power, peace, happiness, and a sense of direction. We tried to impress upon you this book is full of promises from the title page, and to be moved away from this belief system of the promises are only on 82 and 83. And we tried to impress upon you that this program is about the power of God and seeking the power of God. We will not do that unless we see our truth in step 1. I was commenting to someone this morning, I think it's important to mention this, there is spiritual virtue in following the instructions out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have seen in the number of years I've been in sobriety anywhere from 10 to 50 different suggestions on inventory. When we get through going through the instructions on the 5th step, we're going to read you a set of promises that the Big Book gives me if I will write inventory as the Big Book outlines it. And so when somebody comes up to you again and asks you to write an inventory that is inconsistent with this book, you can simply ask them this question: are there a set of promises that I will receive that millions of people have received if I write this inventory that you're trying to get me to write? Of course, they're not going to be able to answer that question. So I'll say this again: there's spiritual virtue in following the instructions out of the Big Book and doing what it says in there. So hopefully in there we were trying to change your attitude about the 4th step. And maybe what we can start carrying in meetings is some sense of excitement about writing inventory so we can face and be rid of that which has us blocked from the power. And inventory is about discovering the truth. I think the other thing that we tried to impress upon you is that, in fact, this is a threefold illness. The book talked about when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. My experience confirms that happens for me, in particular with a lot of work with 4 through 9. So that's the place that we're at. We're trying to show you how these steps are interconnected. You'll also see another reason for this being interconnected, and that is when we go over, after you're done doing the 5th step and spend the hour alone, if you don't understand the connection of 1 through 5, they're going to ask you a whole series of questions, none of which you can answer. We tried to point out to you that in the spiritual arch, step 1 is the foundation, that step 2 is the cornerstone, that step 3 is the keystone. To be able to answer some questions when you're done with the 5th step, is my work solid so far? So, that being the case, let's start on page 70, where I'm going to start to get the instructions to do something with this inventory that I've written. So it says, if we, have been thorough about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. And again, I'm going to go to the singular person because it makes it real personal to me. I have listed and analyzed my resentments. I have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality.
Continuing to turn statements into questions.
Those two words are interesting, futile and fatal. My experience is resentments are futile because I can do absolutely nothing about you and what you're doing in the universe. They're fatal because they block me from God. It says, I have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. I have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even my enemies, for I look on them as sick people. I have listed the people I have hurt by my conduct, and I'm willing to straighten out the past if I can.
I still never feel right when the book says we look on them as sick people, and I don't say to myself what it said back a few pages, like myself. Like myself. Because it just doesn't feel right to me when it's this poor sick person that I'm resentful at down here, and I'm somewhere up here, you know, in that line that we've covered in the fear, between those spaces, between the third and fourth column, when it says they, like myself, are perhaps spiritually sick.
I think there's another point I want to mention in that. We can get real pious around this spiritually sick. Here's what I mean. There's been times I've had a deep resentment in my piosity at what I would say to you as though they're just sick. That wasn't the truth. I wanted to kill them. And what I tell you what I needed to do. I needed to write some inventory, a 4-column inventory, because I don't embrace the idea they're spiritually sick till I've looked at the truth in those first 3 columns, which later turns into a lie. So I want to point that out to you. Don't fall into this trap when you're in fact real resentful of just walking around telling everybody, oh, they're just spiritually sick, and pretending this isn't having some impact on your life. I've had to write inventory around that. It goes on to say in this book, you read again and again, faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. I love this next line. We hope you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from Him. See, your self-will cannot remove your self-will. It says if you already made a decision, step 3, and an inventory of your grosser handicap, step 4, you've made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself.
Having made your personal inventory, what shall you do about it? You've been trying to get a new attitude and a new relationship with your Creator and discover the obstacles in your path. That's a great statement of purpose between 4 and 5 as to my reasons for doing this work. Let me read it again. Been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and discover the obstacles in our path to that. We've admitted certain defects and ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We've put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast out. This requires action on our part, which means when completed will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. This brings us to the 5th step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects with another person. We think we've done well enough at admitting these things to ourselves. There's doubt about that. In actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons why we should. Boom. Now they're going to bring me back to the direct connection between 5 and 1. Every step I need to experience at a gut level the connection back to my reason for doing this. The best reason first. If you skip this vital step, you may not overcome drinking. Time after time, we've tried to keep to ourselves certain facts about our lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, I turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they'd lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves. But they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense that we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. More than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He's very much the actor. To the outer world he presents a stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but he knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. And this I see over and over and over again through my inventory.
My experience has also shown me the more work I do with the steps, the less need there is to present the stage character. It takes a lot of energy to present the stage character.
We talked yesterday about those personalities dying, and if you fall into the trap of using 4 through 9 to solve problems, all those personalities do is get up and change seats. We talked about if you can picture Gurdjieff and Ouspensky talked about it in different ways, the 1,000 eyes in one ego. We talk about it in a simpler way in Alcoholics Anonymous by talking about the committee. And you never know which committee member is going to be in charge that day. And if you begin to use 4 through 9 and you write a piece of inventory and you go, my God, look at what I've been up to. So now all they do is get up and change seats. The passive guy says, God, I've been so passive. And he just gets up and changes seats. This idea about a 5th column, that you should write after seeing truth that's blocking you from God, and your intent is to seek God, you're then to write, what should I do in the future? Then you're just creating yourself in your own image. It's not about taking that stuff to God and asking Him, what if He wants you to remain passive? Or what if He wants you to be aggressive? What if He wants you to find a middle place? Right? It's not about me saying, oh my God, look at what I've been up to, so now because then the whore just gets up and changes seats with the monk. You know,